it's Alice, and today it is the middle of the month, and you know what that means. It's time to talk about the books I've read in the past couple of weeks. The first book that I read is actually one that I've had for what feels like ages, and it is Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton. This is a YA fantasy novel, and it's set in this world where mystical beasts still roam, and we meet this young girl who lives in a desert town, and she really wants to get out of this town before she's married off against her will. And then this mysterious stranger comes into town and she sees her chance to finally get out. So you all probably know that I usually don't read a whole lot of YA, and although this was alright, it does remind me why I usually don't pick up books like this. I have had this book for years though, so I am really pleased with myself that I finally got around to reading it. I do think this one started off fairly well, and my absolute favorite part of this book is the setting. I love the descriptions of the desert, and I love all the myth and folklore stuff, and I do think the magic in here is pretty cool. The characters in here though feel extremely typical to me. Like, these are characters that you will at some point have met in some other YA book, if you know what I mean. And it just didn't do a whole lot for me. I think the plot is pretty predictable. I think it's fairly obvious what's gonna happen. And it just has a lot of tropes in it that I don't like the not like other girls thing, the my parents are dead thing, and my absolute least favorite, which is the one that's like, I'm gonna pretend like I don't like you, but then all of a sudden we're kissing and oh wait, we're actually in love. Like, it's just not my thing. This was a very quick read though, and I read the whole thing in a day, so it served its purpose for entertainment, but that was all it really was for me. It was just kind of okay, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. I will say I do love this cover though. Like, this design is absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure that this book is good for the right reader. The second book that I read was The 100 Nights of Hero by Isabel Greenberg. This is a graphic novel, and it's set in this magical medieval world where a diabolical man makes a wager with one of his friends, saying that if you can seduce my wife within 100 nights, you can get my wife and my castle. And this friend sets off thinking this is going to be easy, but then the wife and her maid has other plans, and they tell him all of these amazing stories to try and distract him from his mission. This was absolutely amazing, and it's one of my favorite graphic novels that I have ever read. The story in here is pretty weird, and it took me a little while to sort of get a grip on it, but when I did, I was hooked. And I love this like magical, wonderful world that this is set in, and I love how all of these stories are about women and storytelling, and I was really impressed by how everything just weaves together beautifully at the end. I've previously read Glass Town by Isabel Greenberg, so I knew that I would love the art style in this, and I absolutely did. I think it's gorgeous, and I love the use of color, and this just feels to me like a very creative book, and it seems like the author has had a lot of fun making this, and you can really tell. This is filled with whimsicality, magic, love, darkness, and quite a lot of humor, and I just absolutely loved it, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I'd really recommend it, especially if you like kind of odd stories, and this has a very like myth-like folklore-y quality to it if you're into that sort of thing. Then I read a book that was sent to me by the publishers, and it is The Truths We Hold by Kamala Harris. This is a nonfiction book, and it's the memoir of Kamala Harris, who I'm sure we all know is currently serving as the US Vice President, and this is her story of being born to immigrant parents, growing up, becoming a lawyer, and eventually a senator. Now, I accepted this book because I wanted to get to know Harris a little more. I think it's really cool that she's gotten to where she's gotten today, and I thought it would be interesting to read about how she got there and where she comes from, and I do feel like I got to know her a little bit better through this book. I thought this was overall quite interesting, and I loved reading about Harris's experience of growing up, reading about her family and her experience of working within the justice system, and I think that you get a pretty clear idea of the fact that she's very intelligent and hardworking, and she really like cares about the people around her. I do think we get to know Kamala Harris, the politician, in here much more than we get to know Kamala Harris on a personal level, if that makes sense. And I think that this is maybe not that uncommon with the memoirs of politicians, but I think that maybe it's just a personal preference, but I think maybe I like going a little bit deeper in my memoirs. I also think that there are parts of this book that feel to me pretty clearly directed to an American audience, and for me, who is not American and I don't live in America, I was interested in those parts, but I maybe didn't connect to them as strongly. Overall though, I do think this was pretty good, and I'm glad that I read it, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I really hope she writes another book when she's done serving as vice president, because I would love to know all about her experience of that, and I'm really excited to just see her work for the next 4 years. Second to last, I finished The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. This is a historical fiction fantasy novel, and it's the second book in the Winternight trilogy, the first book being The Bear and the Nightingale, and these books are set in medieval Russia, and we follow this young woman who has this peculiar gift of being able to see these creatures that very few other people can see. So I'm not going to talk about this one too much because it's the second book and I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say I'm usually quite apprehensive when it comes to reading sequels because I very often feel like they're not as good as the first one, but this one wasn't disappointing like at all, and I loved getting to return to this world again. This has everything that I loved about the first book. It has like winter and magic and this amazing setting, and I especially loved reading about the main character in here because I feel like we get to see her grow quite a lot throughout the story. The atmosphere in here is excellent, the scenery is described beautifully, and it's just a book that's very easy to get engrossed in. It's enjoyable and exciting and a little dark sometimes, but it has this amazing like fairy tale folklore quality to it, and it's just so magical. If you liked the first one, you're gonna like this one as well, there's no doubt. I gave the first book a 4 out of 5 stars, and this one gets the same, and I gotta say, I'm really impressed with this series so far. It might be some of my favorite books that I've read in this genre, so I would really recommend them. Lastly, I read another book that was sent to me very kindly by the publishers, and this one is a completely new release. It is Where Hope Comes From by Nikita Gill, and this is an illustrated poetry collection all about hope, resilience, and healing. I was really happy to receive this book because first of all, this is gorgeous, like I love this cover, and second of all, I've read some of Nikita Gill's other work and really liked it, and this was just lovely. I feel like this is a very timely poetry collection because it deals with living through a pandemic, and it explores all different aspects of that experience, like loneliness and love and grief and death and hope and survival, and it's filled with soul and warmth and honesty, and I just really enjoyed it. I felt like I could really connect to it, and I think that there's a lot of things in here that most people can recognize because of this shared experience that we're all having. The collection is also, like I said, illustrated. So we have all of these like black and white watercolor paintings in here, and I love when poetry collections do this because I feel like it really adds something extra special to the book. And I felt like in this one in particular, it really worked very well because these pages sort of give you a little bit of time to breathe and to sort of contemplate what you've just read, and I just think that works really well. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I would really recommend it if you like poetry, and especially if you like poetry like Rupi Kaur. And I do feel like this is particularly valuable to read right now if you're feeling dragged down by the current situation, which, you know, aren't we all? Okay everyone, those were all the books that I had to review for you today, and I would of course love to know if you've read any of these books, what you've thought, or what else you have been reading lately. Tell me all about it, I would love to know. Links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description as usual if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!